Welcome back to The Short Game. This is the show where we talk about short video games, the kind of things you can probably complete in an evening or a weekend, but more importantly, the kind of games that can try things that big games cannot dare to try. And I am your host, Reagan Kelly, and I am joined this week by my charming co-host, Laura Nash. How are you doing, Laura?
Aw, thank you very much. I'm doing great. And you're right, things that bigger games couldn't dare to try is a good summary of what we're talking about this week.
So this week we're talking about, specifically, we're talking about a quote-unquote game that is Eczema Angel Orifice, which is the collected works, more or less, of Porpentine, or Porpentine Charity Heartscape, if you want the full name.
And people who listen to our interactive fiction episode may remember that in one of our takes we talked about how Porpentine had the best webpage of any game designer we'd ever seen. It is covered in rainbows and animations and glitter on fire. And if you like any of those things, you will probably enjoy the hell out of the collection we're talking about.
Part of what makes Porpentine's work so interesting is Porpentine's aesthetic, but it's also very wrapped up in Porpentine's persona.
Porpentine's description on her website is, "I'm a femme organism in Oakland who makes everything. My aesthetic is I'm really tired all the time. My art is for people who gave up. I heart the feminine." And that's a pretty good starter description. If you want to learn more about her, she's been profiled by, the New York Times. Emily Short's written pieces on her. She's a really cool, weird, surrealist writer who loves trash, femme,
slime,
transgender, slime, depression.
Sprinkles.
She's really interested in kind of marrying these, sludgy, gross, disgusting, creepy elements and putting them right next to the glitter and the diamonds. It's a really interesting mix that makes for a really odd, unique take on interactive fiction.
And she has work that kind of range the gamut from things that are really deeply rooted in the sort of fun side of that aesthetic, all the way to things that are much sort of darker and introspective, but still really eclectic and interesting and sort of surrealist. And there's a real interesting sort of emotional truth or heart to a lot of her work that I think really just sort of elevates it above just sort of mere weirdness for weirdness' sake.
I mean, she's the type of writer for, it's not the type of kid who's playing in House and Food Corner. It's the type of kid who's wondering if they bite their fingernails, what's going to cut at their insides.
That's great.
It's just a nice, it's very imaginative. And the cool thing about this bundle is that she has taken a curative eye toward it. There's a little guide up top of what are you looking for? Fun, contemplative. Are you looking for something long or short, bleak, dreamlike? And it's kind of your own choose your own adventure. They're all Twine games. Yeah. Some have music, some don't. They don't really say if they're going to be, there are trigger warnings, or content warnings rather, not trigger warnings. But you don't really know what you're getting into.
Yeah, this collection was actually exactly what I needed to really fully explore what I've been hearing about Porpentine's work for a while. So first of all of this stuff, all of Porpentine's Twine games, are available for free on her website. So what all this collection does is bundle those together as a single product and basically sell them to you as something you can download to your computer for $5. But something about this presentation, you're right, the sort of curatorial eye of it really makes it a lot more accessible, or at least it did for me. The games are all presented with that guide that breaks it down in terms of which games are long, which games are short, which games are fun, which games are, maybe not so fun. Or fun is the wrong word to be using there. Games that are more serious, or what is the word that they use in the guide? Bleak, yeah. And it really lets you pick the games based on your mood, but also kind of get a better sense of which games are the ones that are important to play, or which games can kind of break up things for you, and, just the very short, quick little things. If you didn't listen to our interactive fiction episode, you may not really be familiar with the format that's being used here. Twine is a game building tool, but it's also sort of a web build. I don't know how to describe Twine exactly. Give it your best shot.
It's an interactive script engine. So basically, it's a clickable version of the Choose Your Own Adventure books, where some pieces of text will let you change them or alter what you see on screen, and other pieces are actually decisions. You can go back and forth, kind of like a few of the early text adventure games where you're moving between rooms, but instead of typing commands in, you're just only choosing elements of the text. Sometimes things will trigger, some of the more elaborate games will include full background changes, sound effects, music. Other ones are just text. Twine is a pretty flexible format, and the nice thing about it is that it lets you focus on the words, and every design decision is intentional. There's nothing, it's black words on a page when you start.
Yeah. It really does focus on the words, too. I mean, calling these games, they are games because I'm a sort of big tent believer in, games are what you play. But I think it's probably more specific or accurate to call these hypertext fiction. These are games that are really about a reading experience. You're making decisions as you go, but something that Emily Short said in one of her pieces that she wrote on her blog, and I'll try to link to as many of those as I can because she's great at explaining what's so important about Porpentine's work. But one of the things she said was that a lot of people automatically sort of conflate the idea of interactive fiction with fiction where you interactively decide the outcome. And that's not really the case with much of Porpentine's work. Really, what we're doing is reading a story that has interactive elements that make it more immersive than simple words on a page. But we're not necessarily, trying to get the best ending or something like that. We're playing the games in order to absorb the story and kind of become involved in it in a way that maybe wouldn't be possible if it was just simple text.
You generally are choosing the language that most appeals to you, not the ending, but you are immersing yourself deeper in the text by being able to choose the option that appeals most to you.
Yeah, sort of customizing the story to work better for you.
Would you like to build with the bone of a heretic or with the blood of a magi? Who knows?
What effect does that have on the game? It's very oblique to tell, but probably none. But it makes it more immersive to make those decisions as you go.
And I was very excited to see heretics later because I had crushed the bone of one earlier in the game. That's not a spoiler for anybody.
No. And of course, there's so many games as a part of this collection that we're not going to be able to, we haven't been able to play all of them, and we won't be able to talk in any real detail about many of them. We're also going to try hard to not spoil anything important. There's not going to be a spoiler break in this episode. We're just going to talk about what we love about the games while keeping it as spoiler-free as possible. If you want a truly unspoiled experience, you can play most of these games online for free right now, and so go play a couple of them and see if Porpentine's stuff, is something that you dig. But if it is, we'll have a link in the show notes to where you can buy this collection for $5. She's also trying to get it listed on Steam, so it's on Greenlight. Voting for it there would probably be a helpful thing. And heck, I don't know, go buy a t-shirt on Porpentine's website. She also sells stickers, which I have just affixed to my laptop.
And if you are really holding out, you're not thinking this is for you, and you happen to like Kesha, Porpentine is the author of Crystal Warrior Kesha, which is not a part of this bundle. But
probably because of the embedded audio, which would have been difficult to include in it.
Probably because it's just it's an interactive fanfic video of the song Warrior by Kesha, which is probably cost more than $5.
Yeah.
So to embed in your game. But it's hella fun. And if you like playing that, you'll probably dig the hell out of these games. I might have said dig the hell out of this game twice already in this podcast. We've been on for like 10 minutes.
I dig the hell out of all of these games, so I'm not worried about it.
Nah. So, since it's hard to know if you're going to love an author just on our words, we wanted to pull a couple snippets we really liked. Sometimes it's a little bit macabre. One I really liked was you have a chance to observe different people by a river, told completely through phrases like, "A spider cat mends its rat heavy web." That's a very dense sentence.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate it's not a plot heavy sentence, and it's the only one really on the page. But that little bit tells me more about this world than some people could do in 8 pages of writing.
Yeah, there's so many little sentences like that. Like a lot of what Porpentine does is build these incredibly dense worlds with just incredibly sparse text. I mean, it's sort of like a weird trash fantasy Hemingway kind of style where like you get just a simple sentence like in Howling Dogs, there's a piece where you have to tell your underlings in this to find a place in which the legends say no gods are buried. And that means, of course, just from that sentence, to find a place in which the legends say no gods are buried, that means that gods are buried all over the place in this world. And that in turn means that gods die in this world and they have bodies and you have to bury them. And it's just so startling. And there's so many little things like that. The biggest one for this for me was probably Howling Dogs, but all of her games kind of seem to build these worlds like this, where she gives you these tiny hints at a bizarre world. High-end customizable sauna experience is giving you these hints at this bizarre world of sort of weird, funny sort of hacker culture in a sci-fi fantasy. Howling Dogs gives you this several hints of weird worlds that you're getting these brief peeks into. With Those We Love Alive, same kind of deal. We're getting these hints of a sort of a dark fantasy world where tiny sentences like that about the spider cat kind of unravel things for you and kind of hint at a larger world that you can't really understand, but that the characters all seem to understand and that have sort of an internal logic. Even Ultra Business Tycoon 3, which is a game about playing a video game, the world of the video game is larger and more complex than you can understand from the text, but you get a real flavor for it. You really understand the world that she's trying to build based on these tiny hints that it gives you throughout.
And I really loved how much the writing reminded me of other authors that I've in bits and pieces. I mean, there's a man called Ray Volkovec who wrote a book of short stories called Me in the Rune Room. One story is entirely about a guy getting stuck in a sweater, which I feel like is right out of a Porpentine game. Or people, coming to a trash heap and turning into violins. There's Catherine M. Valente, who's a more popular author, who's written, Deathless and Palimpsest. That kind of lyrical, meaningful, but also surprising pieces of sentences. One of the nicest things about these games is they're designed to let you fall into them, and then they'll say something that pulls you back to the real world and yourself and makes you remain in the story. Several of the more serious games will immerse you as much as humanly possible and then remind you of the characters you're playing is actually in another world, or will remind you that you're sitting at a desk and you actually have feelings yourself. It's really quite wonderful.
It does a wonderful job of being very visual while still being just about text. I have visual memories of all of these games in my mind where I could almost imagine that I saw these fine details of the things that are barely even described in text, let alone images. And I kind of think of her aesthetic as sort of a glittery version of a text-based H.R. Geiger, like incredibly dark and creepy, and yet, cute and fancy at times as well.
The visuals she has chosen give you a lot of clues about the story. But it's not as if there are no pictures, There's gradients. That's about it. And a couple of them will have little, tiny pixel pictures embedded, but it's more of a surprise to see a picture than you'd think.
So there are about 20 games in this collection. And we want to specifically mention some of the ones that are worth starting with. Every one of her games is worth playing, But with so many games, it's hard to know where to start. And the guide within the collection does a pretty good job of pointing out what to start based on, your preferences. But there's a few games by Porpentine that are particularly famous for one reason or another, and we want to kind of mention some of those and why they're interesting and why you should play those. And we should probably start with Howling Dogs. Howling Dogs is a game that Porpentine started working on and created apparently fairly quickly, like within just a few days or weeks, when she was beginning hormone treatments. She was transitioning, and so the game came out in 2012. But it hadn't gained a whole lot of attention. I think it was created before Porpentine was really all that well known. But a kind of an interesting incident kind of brought it into the awareness of the game's press and of the internet in general. And that was that when Richard Hoffmeyer won the grand prize at IGF, Independent Games Festival, in 2013, I think it was 2013, he actually... he had a booth there for his game, Cart Life, which had just won, and it had been spray painted over with a sign for Porpentine's Howling Dogs. And everybody who came to see the Cart Life booth, the winner, saw Porpentine's game instead. And it actually turned out that it was Richard Hoffmeyer himself who did that to try to shine light on what he thought was a really interesting game. And I thought that was sort of really selfless, interesting, kind of cool move by somebody who was really at the peak of probably it should have been their moment for their game, and yet kind of taking that, that small amount of power that you get in that moment of winning something and using it to shine light on something that you think is really interesting or important.
Yeah, and the game itself, when you start, you're in this hospital or cell, you're kind of, have a couple options to explore the space, but they're pretty limited. But if you take your food and water, you can put on a headset, a visor, and enter into other narratives. And that's partly what I meant by that escapism. Some of these little virtual reality or alternate worlds you step into lasted long enough that I temporarily forgot I was playing the game where you are in a cell. And I'd be kicked back to the cell and I'd be like, ugh, this again. Which I think is exactly how you're supposed to feel. That theme of escapism. Some of them are lovely. A lot of them are about death. Some of them are real past life experience, kind of, hinted at. Maybe it's, saints, religion, all kinds of different, you never know what you're going to get when you lower that visor. And as your cell's getting worse and worse, you just keep wanting to do it more and more.
Of all of Porpentine's games, this one, I'm glad I played it first, because it really sort of caught me off guard. It's very unlike anything else I've ever played in terms of interactive fiction. And something that's really interesting about it that seems like a flaw at first and actually is something that Porpentine really exploits really deliberately, and does in some of her other games as well, is this sort of almost sort of feeling of not being able to do anything. You're trapped in this room. It does seem like sort of a prison cell or a hospital room or a bunk on a spaceship. We really don't know where you, as the protagonist of the game, are. But you are trapped there. There's really not much for you to do. You can go and eat food from the dispenser. You can put your trash into the trash. There's a quote-unquote sanity room where you can go and sit and be refreshed by images of trees and plants and things. But really the only sort of action you can take in that space is to go and sit in this sort of, VR visor. And through that experience, that sort of repetition of that feeling of being trapped, it puts the feeling of escaping through that sort of VR worlds under a sort of a different light. But it's strange the sort of things that you're escaping to. You're escaping into what's presumably various simulations, a simulation of someone who seems to be the victim of some sort of and we won't go into too much detail here to avoid spoilers, but there's something about experiencing victimization and abuse. There's something about experiencing sort of religious persecution, that you sort of reenacting a Joan of Arc type scenario. The final, I think, simulation tells the story of a young girl born to be the queen of some sort of place. And you have a sort of a withered bone foot, which is a part of your, mythology of being born to queenhood.
An
And
empress.
an empress, excuse me, and your all of your instruction as a child is in how to properly die when you are inevitably assassinated. I just love that sort of world building of this culture around death, and having an empress who is a child raised with the idea that you will be assassinated, and how do you do that properly? How do you arrange your body and die in the right light? That sort of thing. Really dark, weird world building, but at the end of every one of these, you're always brought back to that room, being trapped, things falling apart, your room getting more dismal and depressing as things start to break down. It really kind of made me feel that sort of feeling that you get when you feel trapped in your life, even if it's something much more simple and personal, like feeling trapped in your job or in a depressing circumstance. It was very, I don't know, very cool. I really thought Howling Dogs was awesome.
It is a game about choosing again and again to leave, one reality and go into another. And it's, if you liked Cloud Atlas or any of those, not the movie, the book, or both, you could like both. If you like that kind of Matryoshka doll narratives, this one's really awesome.
In the notes about it, Porpentine wrote, I think what a lot of people identified with is the feeling of being trapped in a shitty apartment with a screen, like a monitor or phone or whatever. Your environment falls apart in this haze of poverty, disability, depression, but the screen keeps glowing. And I think that's exactly what I identified with about it. Like, it reminded me of like the lowest I've been in, the poorest I've been, and how there was always some escape, but it never really felt like a true escape.
But it's not the only really good serious game in here. There's a couple other hugely, I would say famous, but they actually are kind of famous. I mean, the other two with that we've called a few times out, with Those We Love Alive, we were talking about kind of the Game of the Year awards last year. Reagan said he was scared to play it because it involves writing on your skin.
Yeah. I have this thing about writing on my skin. I never really like it. I remember in elementary school or maybe middle school, there was this sort of fad where, at least at my school, all of the kids started writing on each other's skin. And it was this sort of like friendship bracelet kind of thing. You would write.
Yeah, that was a weird thing. I don't know why we were doing that, but
yeah. And I was like aghast at it. And I probably didn't have any, probably didn't have enough friends that it would have ever really been a risk. But I was like, I don't want that. Don't write on my skin. Gross. I don't like it. And that actually kind of enhanced the experience for me, because this is a game where sort of the central gimmick, and that's using that word in a positive light. I know that gimmick sounds derisive. I don't mean it that way. But it's sort of central, mechanic.
Hook.
Yeah, exactly. Is that as you play this game, that takes place in this strange world where everything is, bizarre and yet somehow sort of drenched in meaning, the game pauses periodically and asks you to respond to the events of the game and your choices in the game by drawing sigils on your skin with a pen or Sharpie or something it can write on skin. So, it might tell you, draw a sigil of shame, or, how do you feel about that? Draw a sigil representing your feelings about it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it is a tangible artifact of the game. And I would encourage you not to look up anyone's sigils until after you've played. But a lot of people do post pictures afterwards, and it's kind of lovely to... Mine ended up looking pretty personal, and you can see other people sharing it. Some of them are beautiful. Some of them look really intensely individualistic. It is very rare that you get a personal creative expression as a souvenir of a game. And it's even more rare that you get to see other people's creative output and feel like you're part of a larger community.
Yeah, and because these are things that you're drawing on your skin, which is deeply personal and kind of, it's very sensory.
It's intense.
It is intense. And coming away from the game, like, I felt changed by the game, and I mean in a physical, visible way. I think it takes what would be an affecting emotional experience just based on the quality of the prose and the sort of interesting world and story that it builds, and it really does make it something much more sensory. I don't know if this is a tool that others could use. I feel like this is something that Porpentine came up with that is a really smart idea that you get one shot at. This is a really smart one-shot idea, but I think it's brilliant.
The game also has a section where you can go down by a link and meditate. And they just give you meditation prompts to, inhale, exhale, I'm holding my breath. You can change the breathing speed. It says, I need different breaths. And you can say, I want to breathe faster or slower. And they pause between showing you the prompts. So even if you're not actually breathing along with the game, it feels like you are. And that's the kind of care that lets you draw on your skin when she asks for it.
Mm-hmm. And to set up the world of the game without providing too much in the way of spoilers, this is another one of Porpentine's games, like that sort of final simulation of Howling Dogs, that builds a bizarre world. And in this world, you're playing as a
artificier.
Yes, excuse me, an artificier.
And a witch. I love lady witches.
Yes.
And lady artificiers. Build telescopes, take heretic bones.
So a lot of the game is involved with, building things, but you're building things at the command of, is she referred to as a queen here or an empress?
She's also an empress.
Another of Porpentine's more common themes. In some ways, I felt like this was an expansion of that very interesting final simulation from Howling Dogs. You are sort of at the mercy of an enormous, terrifying monster that, a sort of an insectoid, perhaps, creature that is referred to as the Empress and rules, presumably, the whole world. And the Empress is constantly tasking you with building things for her, weapons, and even more intimate things. And so it's a game sort of about that feeling of being. Oh, and also the main character is sort of the victim of some childhood trauma that's very sort of fantasticalized and interesting. But nonetheless, the game does a great job of sort of dealing with these themes of being traumatized or abused as a child, with themes of being sort of at the mercy of evil or dark things, or even just an unfair world filled with people unable to stand up to, something fundamentally wrong.
And like a lot of excellent fantasy and sci-fi, it's handled with a light touch. Mm-hmm. It doesn't immerse you, press your face into the trauma. It doesn't make you, it's not like watching a documentary or watching a movie that takes advantage of your empathy. This game instead wants you to embrace it as part of the world. It'll have commentary on pain, but it's when you're feeling pain as a character, it asks you to think about your real life pain. It doesn't cheat you in that way.
Yeah, by having such a light touch, and not making it about anything that's really overt. I mean, it's more hinting at the world of the game and the history of the characters that you're playing than it is sort of telling you a lot of detail. But partly because of that, I feel like it made it easier to connect with, because although they're in this bizarre fantasy world, it's all fairly easy to connect with. So I thought it was a really, really smart, clever game. The drawing on your skin thing was a hook that worked far better than I expected, and left me thinking about the game long after I left it, and even after I had finally scrubbed the last of those sigils off of my skin.
Yeah, it literally marks you, which is pretty cool. And the last of the three kind of biggies in this set is Ultra Business Tycoon 3, which is an ode to
Shareware.
immersing yourself in shareware.
Yeah.
It's an ode to like shitty shareware that you just kind of take over your life and, forget who you are to play.
This is the game that surprised me the most because it takes such an interesting turn, which avoiding spoilers, we won't talk too much about the ending or anything, but the setup for this game is really fun and amusing, and something I really connected with. You're playing as a person who is playing a video game. So you're playing a game that is simulating a much more sophisticated game. You're playing a game on your computer that is called Ultra Business Tycoon 3, which is a sort of RPG where you're playing as a businessman with a capital B and
businesswoman. Definitely you're an awesome business lady.
Actually, doesn't it let you choose? Because I think I played as a man.
Oh yeah, it did. I just assumed. I forgot. You get to choose your gender.
And you're playing in this incredibly complex business world, although the business world is truly a bizarre fantasy world full of business-themed fantasy things.
Business matrixy things.
Yeah.
I mean, I made some poor decisions. This was like, playing a calculator game about drug wars and then like having it go horribly south. That happened super fast in this game.
Mm-hmm. So your gameplay initially is just about trying to build up $1 million in Ultra Business Tycoon 3, which is a thing that seems almost impossible and made even more difficult by the fact that since you haven't paid for this shareware, you can't get past the shareware barrier where it asks you to put in the game's serial number. Which actually Porpentine kindly provides for you outside the game in a piracy-style NFO file, which I thought was hysterical because it kind of relates back to that feeling that I know I had a ton when I was at the age that I think this game is kind of explaining. In fact, what I enjoyed most was reading her notes and finding that she was specifically inspired by some of the games that I played so much when I was a kid. She says here, shareware barriers are fascinating. They're like chastity devices for worlds. When I was a kid, I had one of those shareware discs with 500 games on it and nothing else to do, and I just go so deep inside each game like I was scraping the meat out of a shell. Nothing could stop me from eternally bonking up against the constraints, not starfighting the parrot in escape velocity that blew my ship into vapor, not the demon in exile that barred me from crossing the lava caves and exploring the subterranean wilderness and all its lonely secrets. Shareware protection felt like an extension of the landscape itself, a physical chasm imprisoning me. And I know that. And in fact, escape velocity and the parrot she talks about, it was a huge part of my childhood. And I remember trolling through forums and through news groups trying to find a serial number for escape velocity, which I couldn't afford at the time, because after a certain period, if you didn't have the code for escape velocity, a parrot and a spaceship would come and kill you every time. And I remember getting killed by that parrot so many times that I was willing to go to the dark side of the internet, break the law, try to steal the game. And when I did find it, I broke through and I played the rest of the game and the galaxy opened up for me. And this really connected with that sort of experience for me.
Yeah, I think I also intentionally delayed putting in that code for a while because I it is horribly frustrating. As I remember from, hell, even a lot of the, dumb games my brother would buy, like Leisure Suit Larry, like I couldn't find the, book and turn to page 507 and write the word on the second paragraph. It's like, maybe it's door. Just trying to hack it horribly. And it has a little bit of that Howling Dogs bit where you're cycling through. There's lots of rounds. That kind of repetitive nature, but it is, it's a prison of our own making. people who like games.
It is.
And die a lot. I feel like if Nate was here, he'd be talking about FTL right now.
Yeah, he's been imprisoned by that for years now.
Absolutely.
And that's a really good point. I never, at the time, certainly never thought of that as a prison. But I think about it now and think, why did I spend that time when I could have just, I don't know, somehow scraped together the cash to buy a shareware code? And then I think, no, as a child, that was entirely beyond my reach. I might as well have been trying to, buy a car to escape. It was impossible. But what's really fascinating about this game is that it's not a game about getting money and being an ultra business tycoon. It's a game about playing ultra business tycoon and the experience of being that age and being sort of endlessly trapped in your home and having to escape through this game.
And having to see the same cutscenes over and over and over again.
Exactly. And where it becomes really fascinating is where this game turns to hinting at and eventually really diving you into the world outside the game, the world of the player of the game. And that's where it also really connected with me, because I remember that feeling of being young and escaping my life through games. I didn't live a tortured existence or anything, but every childhood is full of little miseries, and the world outside the game being so much less appealing than the world within it, and escaping, and maybe even escaping things that really you ought to be more present for, is a theme that I really connected with.
Yeah. And one of the nicest things about this bundle is that in addition to these longer, not even that long, maybe an hour.
Yeah, like how long are these? They're maybe... I played through most of these longer games that we're talking about here, like Ultra Business Tycoon, in 45 minutes to an hour.
Yeah, they're not long. But if you are looking for a more snack size experience, there's a lot of funny short games. There's a frog simulator called Beautiful Frog.
Which is adorable.
It is adorable. Sometimes I was good at hopping. Sometimes I was good at singing. Sometimes I died really soon because I accepted the inevitability of frog death.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my choice. There's a weird Super Diamond War reenactment where you can... I don't want to spoil anything, but some of the choices you make will end the game very quickly. Mm-hmm. There's one that just seems to be, faceless, genderless, amorphous bone mass hair beast was just about cuddling with a faceless, genderless, amorphous bone mass hair beast, kissing, nuzzling, snuggling with it, and then going and getting him lollipops. Mm-hmm. You don't need much.
And they get even simpler. List of hell genders is literally a list of hell genders, whatever those are. It's a list. It's something that you can click in, and therefore, in some ways, it is interactive. It is a game, but it's really just an expression of a strange line of thoughts by Porpentine. And all of these little tiny things are something that you can dip your toe into and get a sense of the mind of the author. And it's full of very interesting, weird imagery and fun thoughts.
Yeah, I really enjoy that she has chosen to make this her performance art medium. It is wonderful that Porpentine wants to make games to make people feel things, to make people feel awesome, to make people cry, to move people, and that she's $5 is pretty awesome for the amount of writing you get.
Yeah. So if you want to check out these games, and I absolutely 100% recommend that you do, the easiest way to do that is through this collection. You can go in the show notes. We'll have a link, and it's on itch.io. By the way, itch.io is doing amazing stuff. If you aren't checking out their website, the front page of itch.io or itch.io or however we're saying it, is one of the most interesting places to see strange little games on the internet today. And they're doing amazing stuff over there. And this game is on sale at itch.io for $5. And it's available for Mac and PC. It's also on Steam Greenlight, waiting for your votes to get this released to a wider audience on Steam. And I think that it'd be a great way to support Porpentine's work by going there and voting for it. And I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes for that too. If you, for some reason, aren't sure about it, maybe $5 has been hard to come by for you right now, go to Porpentine's website with all its wonderful GIFs and gradients and great backgrounds. And you can play, essentially, I think, all of these games for free on her website. All of these games can be played in a browser. But then you'll be lacking the really useful guide to her collection here, as well as her really fascinating notes on each piece, kind of giving her thoughts on, where she was when she wrote them, or the themes, or, what really they're all about. So definitely pick up this collection. The title is Eczema Angel Orifice, and we'll have a link to it in the show notes, of course.
And though it's not actually calendar summer, it's still like 85 degrees in Chicago, so we can still call this summer reading.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we wrap up, Laura, what have you been up to this week?
Well, I'm preparing for a trip to Tokyo. I leave on Sunday.
Oh my God, I'm so jealous. I almost forgot, and I'm really jealous. I've never been to Japan.
I'm really excited. In advance, I've borrowed a copy of Majora's Mask for DS.
Perfect.
To play on the plane. My boyfriend is not happy about this because he wants to watch videos and hang out with me on the plane. And the fact that I've started playing that worries him. He'll deal. He'll read comics. It'll all be good. So I've started Majora's Mask.
How long is that flight?
It's 17 hours, but we have a layover in Toronto of an hour and a half.
Oh my God.
So we fly to Toronto and then go across. So I think, there's some kind of mystic voodoo where coming back, I'm leaving at like 3 p.m. and getting in at 6 on the same day. But that's because we're crossing the date line.
Yeah.
But in the mix of comics and Miyazaki movies, and plane movies and books, Majora's Mask is going to be in that wonderful mix, and I'm excited because, I'm going to go to Japan. I should be playing video games at some point, and spending too much money. Mostly I've been preparing for that, but I've been playing a lot more Race of the Sun on the iPhone, and I recently have completed Region 4 for the first time, and that was a big milestone for me.
Wow, I am so bad at that game. I've been playing on the Vita, although I've sort of set it aside recently as I've been playing a bunch of other interesting stuff on the Vita. But I still pick it up every now and then because it's such a great little pick up and play game. I've never gotten past Region 3, never once.
Have you been into a crazy portal?
Yes, I think so, if I know what you're talking about. Sort of teleports you forward, right?
Teleports you into a weird star world.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. But yeah, so a pretty light week for games for me, but I am still horrified by the noise Link makes every time he puts on a mask. He sounds like he's dying. I'm kind of not okay with it.
Well, you'll have enough time to finish it on your 2 17-hour flights, so yes. Good luck to you there.
Thank you.
I've had an interesting week, too, as far as games are concerned. I finished Everybody's Gone to the Rapture this week, which I've been kind of playing in small chunks. It's something that we may eventually talk about on this show because it is a short game, but we probably aren't in a hurry to talk about it. There's a lot of great reviews out there. If it's a game that you're interested in, I would say check it out.
Lovely.
I'm also almost done with Persona 4, a game which has taken me 80 hours, the opposite of a short game. So I'm very excited about finishing that one. And I've also been playing a lot of Super Time Force Ultra, which was free on PS4 and Vita as a part of the PlayStation Plus program this month. And that's pretty much it for me this week. I guess the last thing that I'm kind of excited about is that before too long, pretty soon here, you, me, and Nate, and sadly not Shane, but at least 3 of the 4 hosts of the short game are going to be in the same place at the same time. Do you think that it will tear space-time apart?
I have never actually met Nate in person, so we might break the space-time continuum.
And the first time you meet is going to be at his wedding, which is...
It's going to be wonderful.
Great. We're all going to St. Louis for Nate's wedding. And so if you want to wish Nate, happy nuptials, you can do that at our website, www.theshortgame.net.
Please use our website.
Use
You'll love
our
it.
feedback form, or you can write to info@theshortgame.net, and I will make sure that your good wishes will be passed along to our currently absent co-host in time for his wedding day. Of course, I have been your host, Reagan Kelly. You can find me on Twitter at Reagan K. That's RayGank. Laura Nash, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Laura J. Nash.
And of course, our website is always there for you. You can check it out at www.theshortgame.net. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of The Short Game, and we'll see you soon.